les autres. C'est un travail difficile, on le sait, mais on nage tous dans la même direction. So it's difficult work. We know it. We might have different opinions, but we're all trying to achieve the same goal. So basically, we're in this together. Let's support each other. So I'm mindful of the time and also that there's a hard start for Germaine because there's another meeting at 2. So I will invite our PCO colleagues to open up their presentation if they can. Sinon, je peux le faire. Donc, je suis consciente qu'il y a une rencontre à 2 heures, donc à laquelle Germaine doit assister. Donc, super contente de pouvoir mettre la présentation au besoin ou de vous laisser le faire. Ça va bien? D'abord, ça va bien, Rob et Germaine. You're doing good? Tout va bien?
Oui.
Good. Happy to see you.
Merci. Est-ce que vous voyez la présentation en ligne? Là?
Oui, tout fonctionne. Super. Merci.
Merci. On va commencer par s'introduire d'abord. Merci, merci de nous avoir invités ici à vous parler. Oui, Lisa qui a la main levée tout de suite. Merci de nous avoir invités ici à venir vous présenter les résultats des rapports que nous avons reçus récemment sur l'appel à l'action en faveur de l'antiracisme, de l'équité et de l'inclusion dans la fonction publique. Je m'appelle Germaine Chazou-Cindy, je suis la directrice des opérations ici au renouvellement de la fonction publique à PCO. I am Germaine Chazou-Cindy. I'm a director of ops operations here at the Public Service Renewal at PCO. And
thank you, Germaine. Hi, everyone. I'm Robin Cleary. I'm Assistant Director here at Public Service Renewal.
For those who don't know, a little branch, a little division here supports the clerk in his role as the head of a public service, and we also help to support departments in the implementation of the clerk's call to action. I will pass it off to Rob now to start off the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Germaine. Want to just walk you through a bit of our presentation today. You can go to the second slide. Perfect. Just do a quick tech check. Mary Lane and others, can you see the objective slide? Objective? Excellent. Thank you so much. I won't do this for every slide. But we wanted to come to this group and talk to you about a few things today. And so first off, thank you, Mary Lane, Ali, and others for setting up this meeting. You know, an important part of our work on the call to action is engaging with public servants from all different organizations, from all different levels, from all different communities, to share out, you know, stuff that we're finding, stuff that we're seeing, and some of the trends that, you know, are coming up. But we know that we sit in a certain vantage point and we hear certain types of information, and you know, and so we'd like to have a check-in with you know, a lot of other public servants to see, you know, how is it going, how is it resonating. I think there's a lot of different you know, a lot of different truths out there of how this work is unfolding, right, in organizations. And so this is right important for us to not only share this out, but to hear from you. So we did want to spend a bit of time sharing you know, what we've heard from this exercise that I'll talk a bit more about you know, in a moment, and also talk to you a bit about, you know, where we want to go next on some of this, you know, on some of this work. I think it did reveal there's some areas where we do want to put a bit more focus and attention on going forward. So, you know, to start off, I think it's important to contextualize the recent sort of progress supporting exercise as part of quite a longer journey. And so I've been fortunate myself that I've been with the Renewal Secretariat even before 2021, but I've got to kind of see this journey unfold on the call to action. And so right, the original call to action was released back in January 2021. Shortly after that, we asked departments to submit open letters just to do a check-in on how progress was being made. And we heard a lot of feedback on those letters. Frankly, a lot of feedback on what didn't work so well on those letters.
Rob, I'm super sorry. Would you mind using PowerPoint Live? If you can't on your end, I can actually load it. Some people need it for accessibility.
Okay, is
This work?
this working?
Can people who need it for accessibility confirm if it's working for them? I'll put it.
I think it sounds like it's working. Thank you for stopping for that. I want to make sure it's shared out properly. So thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And so those open letters, we heard a few points of feedback on the open letters. I think two of the big points of feedback is people would have appreciated a much more structured approach to them, and would have liked to see a lot more, I think, deliberate engagement with employees. And so after those letters were released, right, we did quite a bit more engagement. We held a little symposium to share some practices. And then in May of, I think it was last year, May 2023, the clerk released a forward direction of the call to action, which really got into, I think, a bit more of a specific and structured approach to what we wanted to see departments and agencies do. And namely, that's, set goals, measure progress, and establish consequential accountability for change. And so similarly, about a year later, we did want to do a check-in with organizations to see how's it going in terms of implementing the specific objectives of the call to action. And so we designed a fairly highly structured template reporting form that asked, I think, some specific questions to organizations to see how's it going. And so we received 92 responses from departments and agencies from across the public service. And we have posted all of those responses online on the PCO website. As well, we internally prepared a high-level summary report, knowing that, most people don't have the luxury of being able to actually read through 92 separate reports. And so, Germaine and I, this is why we want to engage you today to help unpack, right, some of what we found, and then also engage you in a bit of a conversation in terms of, what your reactions are. And, I should say, before I pass it back to Germaine, just that the work on the call to action is really underpinned by a lot of work that, other organizations, other networks and communities, I suspect many of you on the call today are advancing too. And so this is not, work that's being done sort of in a vacuum. It's part of a larger ecosystem of work that's being done to enhance and advance, diversity, accessibility, inclusion, reconciliation across the public service.
Thank you, Rob. Les prochaines diapos parleront un peu des faits saillants et des enjeux, des défis qu'on a eu à relever dans les rapports. We'll get into some highlights that we got from the report. So in reviewing, as Rob mentioned, we did receive about 92 reports from 92 different departments and organizations across the public service. And in reviewing all 92 departmental self-assessment, we saw that many organizations, many departments were able to set goals for recruitment for Indigenous employees and racialized employees. But we did also notice that a fewer number of those departments were able to set goals for Black employees. One of the top reasons that department mentioned where they were not able to set goals for Black employees is the lack of the data. The department said that without the self-identification campaign, they're facing challenges identifying Black employees, and this has an impact on everything else that the CTA calls for. So it has an impact on the ability to implement some of the tangible actions, and Rob will get into more details as we go along in the presentation this afternoon. For example, some said that they had a hard time prioritizing Black employees for official language training for the advancement. So that's really what we heard from organization in terms of the lack of the self identification campaign. But as we heard from our colleagues from TBS recently, apparently that's still in works. It's hopefully before the end of the year, we will be able to have access to the process. They'll be able to launch the self-identification campaign. Department are also leveraging existing tools to measure progress, such as dashboard, external reviews, pulse surveys. But more work needs to be done in terms of sharing the information with the employees, and in a way that is easily accessible and transparent, so that more people can engage in and ensuring that we're able to set inclusion goals in each department. Most departments are also using PMA as a process to hold senior leaders accountable. Only a small group of organizations expressed that they have gone a step further to really implementing the consequential accountability in their process. The deck that you receive have some the name of some organizations that said they were doing some of these things. We want to create opportunities for collaboration and to learn from one another. So I encourage you to either take a chance to read your own department's self-assessment, but also looking into the information that we provide at the end of the slides, so that you know who is doing what, and you can engage, or you can get your department to engage with others to be able to learn from them. Most organizations have developed multi-year action plans that outline activities and initiatives aimed at anti-racism, equity, and inclusion. So we did see that there's an increased awareness in terms of anti-racism activities across the public service. So again, Rob will be able to share a little bit more on that in the next few slides. One thing that I really wanted to talk about is the common challenges. What did we note as being some of the challenges that organization kept putting forward as things that are preventing them from either successfully implementing the CTA or just seeing progress in the work that you're doing? One of the main issues is disaggregated data. I've already spoke about the lack of self-identification campaign. So there were very few organizations that actually set goals for Black employees, because those were able to run their own internal self-identification campaign. So another thing about data is that smaller organizations found it difficult to balance recruitment and internal talent development. Some organizations have difficulty staffing highly specialized roles because of the small talent pool that is available to pull from. So for the pool of people to choose from to staff some position is really, really small, and it makes it harder for them to reach that goal of increasing opportunities for Black, so Indigenous, Black, and racialized employees. For measurement, access to disaggregated data was probably the top concern. Organizations face difficulties collecting information beyond the 4 employment equity groups. So again, with the lack of disaggregated data, they were a lot of them were saying that they could only stop at Indigenous, people with disabilities, visible minority as a subgroup, and women, which are the current 4 groups in employment equity. Employees raise concerns with stigma and confidentiality around the self-identification. People do not trust the system. They're always afraid that this is going to go against what the self-identification process is supposed to be about. So we still have a lot of work to do in terms of increasing awareness and really explaining the raison d'être of the self-ID campaigns. Micro and small organizations often have their data suppressed for confidentiality reasons and miss out on opportunities to better understand their organization. So that makes it difficult to see who is who within smaller and micro organizations. Identifying a way to measure inclusion has been difficult to some. So, so has putting quantitative accountability measures in PMA. So that's something that we heard a lot, and that we'll need to figure out ways to work with organizations in responding to those issues. Some departments have expressed uncertainty due to lack of permanent funding for their anti-racism secretariat and lack of resource to implement some of those initiatives. Again, these are things that we have to take into consideration. Initiatives that are there to support Indigenous, Black, and racialized employees tend to be temporary. So lack of resources was another top issue that was identified by organizations. And the last, and maybe not the least, but maybe the biggest thing right now is resistance and backlash. Some employees feel that it's unjust to prioritize Indigenous, Black, and racialized employee, and so again, there's a huge need to increase communications and maybe understanding of why the CTA is important, why we're prioritizing these three groups, so that we have a lot of work to tackle those resistance and tackle some of the backlash that we've seen rising over the last few years. Rob.
Yeah. Thank you, Germaine, for that overview. I wanted to spend a bit of time unpacking some of the specific topics. So the first is representation goals. And so we asked organizations to set recruitment and promotion goals for Indigenous, Black, and racialized employees. And like Germaine said in her overview, by far recruitment and promotion goals for Black employees was marked lower than for the other two groups of employees. And like Germaine said, some of the common reasons why that was cited, why that was happening was, some people are waiting for the OFRO expanded self-ID form. Some people are waiting for the EE Act proposed amendments to come through. And then the other thing that I just wanted to note is in these 92 submissions, they really do represent a large cross-section of the public service. And so there's organizations that made a submission where they might have 20 employees, where they might have 20 employees or 50 employees. And so for some of those really small and micro organizations, they actually don't, their data does get suppressed for privacy reasons. But if there's sort of one silver lining that I can take away from this is, there are organizations who are setting goals for Black employees, and we know who they are. And so what we want to do is we want to, see if we can do some sharing of practices across the public service, because, one thing that's, I think, showed us in this exercise was that this work is possible. And I think, that there's a lot of, that it is possible to implement, right, some of these practices and approaches. I'd also just say that in terms of setting goals, we also noted that, many organizations were relying on a WFA. I can see in the chat that's a bit of a, topic there. And organizations actually, said in their submissions that they recognize, some said they recognize that, using WFA is drawing on very old data. I think it's 2016 census data and 2017 persons with disability data. And so there were, again, other organizations who were using some other approaches, some working with StatsCan to do some modeling, some using more sort of business practices and business needs to set their goals. And so that's something I think we want to dig into a bit more and, share some of the practices that, can get sort of beyond that WFA data. Yeah, next slide. So inclusion goals. So I'll be frank with you. This was a result that was a bit surprising to me, and I think the rest of our team, where they said 73% of organizations said they have inclusion goals. And it was a bit surprising because we've engaged sort of one-on-one with a lot of different organizations. And one of the challenges that, came out in those conversations was the difficulty and challenge around adequately and appropriately measuring inclusion. And so when we started to dig into the results that were actually behind these numbers, what we actually found was that a lot of these inclusion goals were fairly activity-based, so meetings with employee networks, having events, things like that, as well as a lot of it really heavy reliance, right, on the PSES. And so, I think those inclusion goals, I think there is still work that needs to be done to, sort of deepen our, measurement of inclusion. And this is something that we've actually, in PCO, we've been working closely with our colleagues in OPRO to help develop some guidance and some approaches to measuring inclusion. And we're hoping to be able to share that out shortly, hopefully within the next couple months. And so that'll be a tool that, will help organizations to measure inclusion within their organizations. On measuring progress, this is an area where, I think it shows that, organizations in general were, I think, relatively strong on their approaches to measuring progress. Again, in our conversations with a lot of organizations, a lot of times people would, show their dashboards that they use on the screen, show their spreadsheets. And so organizations are using sort of a variety of different tools like scorecards and dashboards and frameworks to measure the progress. One thing, that we did see that was a bit more mixed in the results was how that progress is being shared out. So some are sharing it out very broadly, very widely. Some are putting it on intranet sites. Some are sharing very openly with their management teams. And then some, are not sharing quite as widely there. So that's, something I think we want to look at. On the accountability piece, so this is where we ask, how are you holding your executive teams accountable for change, for the results that, we are collectively working towards? And by far, most organizations are putting qualitative statements into performance management agreements. We're seeing a smaller number, about 40%, who are using quantitative, so numbers, into PMAs. And we're seeing an even smaller number, 16%, that are actually putting tangible consequences for lack of progress into performance management agreements. Again, I try to, be optimistic in this work. And so one thing that this tells me is there are organizations out there who are putting consequences into PMAs for lack of progress. And this is something that, in PCO that we want to pull out a bit more, and make sure that those organizations that are doing that work, that it's known across the public service, and that, hopefully they can be used as a bit of inspiration for others to adopt those kind of approaches. The last slide before I pass it back over to Germaine is in the forward direction, we had asked organizations some specific questions on some specific topics. And a lot of these topics were actually developed, through the benefit of, conversations with different employee networks and groups. So I don't want to unpack every single one of these for you today, but I do want to pull out a few of the sort of more, I think, interesting points in some of these topics. And so the first one I'll jump down to is official language training. And we saw that about half of the organizations, just under half, are prioritizing this kind of training. But again, when we sort of dug into the results behind that, we found that a lot of that prioritization of training was actually just offering training to all employees rather than, a bit more specific or targeted training. The two others that I want to just mention is embedding anti-racism work. So there we saw a lot of organizations are embedding, anti-racism, equity and inclusion objectives into their business plans, but a few less, sort of digging down and drilling that down into regional or branch business plans. And so we're hoping, even just by asking that question, that's hopefully planting a seed for, some people to think about how you can, embed some of this stuff down right into, all aspects of your organization. And then the last thing I wanted to just mention on this slide is, considerations for holding events and major meetings on religious and cultural periods. And so noted that there's a number of organizations, a small handful are, adopting practices like, having a calendar in place. But Germaine mentioned at the, at the back end of this presentation that we shared out in the calendar invite, there's some examples from departments on specific work that they're doing to embed this work. And one of the examples that that is in the presentation deck is from CEDQ, the Economic Development Agency for the Regions of Quebec. And they actually, in their event planning form, have a little box that says, have you made sure that this event is not taking place on a, major religious or cultural date? And so, there was a few practices like that where, it was not a calendar approach. It was a different kind of approach, right, to ensure that this, that these considerations are being made. And so, it's hand it over to Germaine to talk a bit more about employee networks.
Yes, merci. La prochaine diapo parle vraiment de l'investissement des organisations vers leur réseau d'employés. Et je ne vais pas lire tous les exemples qui sont offerts en ligne, mais j'aimerais juste apporter de l'information supplémentaire ici en termes du genre de soutien que les organisations offrent à leur réseau. So I just wanted to share with you a small number of support that organization offer or invest in their network. So we did have a question there about what kind of support. And I think a huge majority of organizations responded that, yes, they do have an employee network and they do offer some kind of support to the network. So some of them included dedicated champions to support the work that the network is doing, access to some human resources, access to translation, access to administrative support. Some, such as Canadian Heritage, as you can see on screen there, offer financial resources. BCH actually offers up to $10,000 to each and every employee network that they have to do different type of activities within the organization and support their members. So these are some of the supports that we were able to track in the reports that we got. 71% of organizations said that they engage the employees in decision-making processes. 84% of organizations said that the governance structure that they support the governance structures for employee networks. 78% of the organization said that they provided material support to their networks, and then 29% of them said that they're developing strategies to support the networks, and then only a small number, 7% of organizations said that they didn't have a network, and if they did, they didn't invest in the network. So again, this is positive progress that I'm hoping that some of those that do not have plans in place could could mirror and contact those other organizations and learn from them and maybe offer some kinds of support to the network. So, pour finir la présentation, on va parler des prochaines étapes. Qu'est-ce que nous sommes en train de faire maintenant? C'est partager les résultats avec les différentes organisations, partager avec les différents réseaux, essayer de promouvoir les pratiques que nous avons pu voir dans les rapports. Et puis aussi, nous voulons vraiment commencer à trouver des solutions pour éliminer les obstacles systémiques. So in terms of next step, what we really want to focus on now is really identifying and finding solutions to dismantle systemic barriers. We didn't have a specific question in the self-assessment questionnaire, but we know that a lot of the things that came up showed that there's still barriers, systemic barriers that are preventing some of this work to actually progress within organization. We also want to identify and support approaches to address resistance and backlash. So, on veut trouver et soutenir des approches vivant à contrer la résistance. Donc, le fait que certaines personnes trouvent que c'est encore injuste de prioriser les employés autochtones, les employés noirs et puis aussi les employés racisés. Qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire de plus pour éliminer cette résistance-là à travers la fonction publique? Donc, nous voulons vraiment engager les réseaux et engager les autres ministères dans une réflexion où nous voulons ensemble essayer de voir est-ce que nous sommes sur la bonne piste. We have an ADM task team which are really eager to start working, on those systemic barriers and also finding support and approaches to address resistance. So the next slide is really about opening this up to conversation. Were you surprised with any of the things that we shared with you today? Did you read the report for your organization? And then where do you see this? Where do you see potential for progress when it comes to systemic issues? I'm going to stop here and open it up for more conversation. Je vous remercie vraiment de l'opportunité de partager ces informations avec vous. Nous sommes toujours disponibles à venir parler à venir partager plus avec vous au moment qui vous convient le plus. N'hésitez pas à communiquer avec nous, n'hésitez pas à nous inviter. Et j'aimerais bien les personnes pourraient commencer à répondre un peu. Nous faire savoir s'il y a quelque chose qui nous a surpris. Et selon vous,
Hello. Trying to see what happened there. No, I know. I can't hear anything either. Just give me a minute, please. Rob, you'll need to unmute.
But we are unmuted.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So I guess somebody tried to mute the background noise we were hearing, or the person, and we all got muted. So, and Nathalie, I did see a hand up before mine, Nathalie.
Thank you very much. My name is Nathalie Dole. I'm chair of Employees with Disability network at Public Safety. I would like to share with you all our network opinion on one of the items which was brought up today, particularly on measuring progress exercise that took place last May. It was initiated at your office, Public Service Renewal Office, I believe. Despite of referencing the nothing without our strategy. This task, in our opinion, was poorly thought out, insensitive, and honestly discriminatory against public servants with disabilities. Employees with disabilities were excluded as a group of deserving of this assessment. Once again, our needs, barriers, challenges are being ignored. I can hear you still mentioning some persons with disabilities in your presentation today. You talk about inclusion. But what we feel very strongly, if things continue in this way, there's no reason to believe that meaningful, evidence-based progress towards disability inclusion will be achieved or reported. We're strongly opposing this. Frankly, ableist and exclusionary nature of this assessment. This assessment is being framed around issues of values and ethics, and presumably inclusion of all public servants, including persons with disabilities. However, excluding employees with disabilities from this assessment is in contradiction with the government commitment to values and ethics. We are aware that focus of call to action does not have not specifically mentioning issues of employees with disabilities. But we want you to know that this current focus has many critical and irreversible consequences for employees with disability of this government. Not being directly and strongly supported at the very top of this government has negatively impacted employees with disability who has been and continue being neglected, left behind in far too many recent government-wide diversity and inclusion undertakings. Employees with disability excluded from this government in-depth studies, comprehensive data analytics, accountability and measured exercise, that the one I mentioned just now, such as one I have mentioned. And employees with disability also not in a radar of Auditor General investigations, despite of plummeting promotion rates over the last decade, at the time when other employment equity groups have been experiencing notable dramatic improvements. There are no direct monetary investment that support employees with disability careers, address their numerous challenges in succession. As things stand, it appears that this government has abandoned us and has shown indifference to our experiences, well-being, and future success as public servants. 5 years after passing the Accessible Canada Act, employees with disability receive only empty promises, performative slogans, generalized diversity and inclusion strategies, plans, then bring them no benefits, not address their unique challenges, and departmental implementation of legislatively enforced accessibility plan has been reduced to issuing progress reports that demonstrate no measurable evidence of meaningful improvement and advancement in working lives of persons with disability. At this time, the engagements with
I'm sorry, Natalie, I don't want to cut you off.
Has been treated as a checkmark exercise. I'm finished. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for the question. And again, I think it's to keep on topic, and I appreciate all that you've said, and I think there's a lot of value, and I think it needs to be taken and considered in, I don't want to say a separate, but in a more intertwined conversation, looking at the various data sets that exist that cross-reference the various dimensions, we'll call them. Donc, et puis je vais juste résumer un peu en français aussi, là, parce qu'on a des participants francophones qui n'ont peut-être pas compris non plus l'énoncé que Nathalie a mentionné. Donc, dans le contexte de l'appel à l'action du greffier, il y a certains employés qui font partie des groupes de personnes en situation de handicap qui se sont sentis abandonnés. Donc, outre la loi canadienne sur l'accessibilité, il y a beaucoup de plans qui ont été faits, beaucoup de promesses, beaucoup de stratégies, mais il n'y a pas eu les investissements bâtiments ou les mesures qui ont été mises en place pour aider à la concrétisation de toutes ces promesses-là par rapport aux personnes en situation de handicap. Donc, quand il y a eu l'énoncé spécifique pour l'appel à l'action du greffier qui semblait vraiment se concentrer sur un seul, pas un seul groupe, un seul type de barrière, je vais dire, ces employés-là se sont sentis mis de côté. Donc, est-ce qu'il n'y a pas matière, peut-être à plus long terme, d'aller condenser toutes encore là, mettre l'accent sur, ça c'est ma spin à moi, là, sur les barrières, les obstacles que tous les groupes rencontrent pour essayer de trouver des solutions communes. Parce que moi, c'est ça que j'entends. J'entends beaucoup de monde blessé. That's what I'm hearing currently, and that's what I keep telling a whole lot of people. I hear a whole lot of people who are hurt, a whole lot of people who felt, and it's not Germaine and Robert that I'm blaming. I'm just hearing a whole lot of people that are hurt, that were expecting a whole lot of promises on various fronts, whether we're talking about accessibility, whether we're talking about anti-racism work. People were expecting a whole lot more, and they have not seen it. Is there a way for all of us basically to hold hands and just identify together the barriers so we can dismantle them, is what I'm trying to get at, because basically as long as we're going at each other are divisive in terms of what we feel are our own barriers, we're not going to get there, especially with the resources that are going to get thinner. Ça, c'est ma spin à moi, encore une fois. Donc, selon moi, on devrait tous se mettre ensemble pour identifier les barrières, les obstacles, puis les moyens de les enlever, parce que là, les ressources vont devenir de plus en plus minces et moins disponibles. Donc, ça va être de plus en plus difficile si on est divisé, puis qu'on se barre les uns contre les autres au lieu d'essayer d'arriver ensemble pour démanteler le tout, là, parce que ce qui s'en vient ne sera pas nécessairement le plus simple à accomplir. But I'll let Caroline.
Marilyn, my
Oui.
question actually was not for you, but for the presenters.
Yes,
So thank you for your very long explanation. My remark was addressed to Robert and his colleague.
I can appreciate this, and I think honestly in this space that where the whole presentation was about the CTA, I will let them for like 2 minutes answer, and then we have 3 other people, and then Germaine has to leave. So maybe if Germaine, tu as une réponse?
Yeah, I can just say that, so the call to action, it does take a deliberate focus on anti-racism efforts. I think, some of the results that we shared out underline that there is unfortunately a need to continue to do a lot of work in this space. I would say, though, that, when we talk about where we want to go next on systemic barriers, so I'll be very transparent. We're still in very, very, very early stages of our team in terms of how and what we want to address through that. But, I suspect that as we start to open that conversation up, we know that there's barriers there's way too many barriers. There's way too many barriers for persons with disabilities. There's barriers for Indigenous people like myself. There's barriers out there. And I think as we open that up, I think there'll be space there to look at, are there accessibility barriers that we can also address, through some of this work too.
And if I can add
Sure.
that, sorry, the CTA was just one tool. You did mention the nothing for us without us framework as well. So there are other opportunities out there. This is the CTA is just one tool to reach our goal of being more inclusive. But definitely, we're hearing that as well. And then wherever we can implement, insert the need to respond to a greater population's issue, les besoins de la plus grande communauté, nous allons les faire le plus possible.
Merci beaucoup. And again, happy to have this conversation at another separate time for those who want to take part in it. Dear Caroline.
Sure. Jermaine and Rob, thanks for all the good work that you guys continue to do. I know this is not an easy thing, and we're probably all feeling a little bit stressed out because things aren't happening in a timely manner the way we would like them to happen. So, a couple of things that I want to raise with you. I have been looking at behavioral insights, and I'm not sure whether you guys have been looking at that in terms of how do we measure success, how do we affect change in a system that really struggles to shift and will struggle even more now that we're heading into austerity. So I'm happy to have a separate conversation with you about behavioral insights, the proposal that we've put forward. And so let's do that. But the point that I wanted to raise is that we are kind of working at cross purposes here in the system. We talk about self identification, campaigns, increasing representation. And I think both of you know that Indigenous identity theft is a huge issue in the media, on Instagram, Race Shifter, Ghost Warrior Society. In particular, now there's been a stronger focus on within the public service. And so I want to be really clear that there should be some kind of a coordinated approach to addressing that as part of inclusion. So whether that's a federal working group of different partners and central agencies coming together, as opposed to a lot of the piecemeal stuff that I'm seeing going on. Because you can go out and you can run campaigns for increasing self-ID, but if you are increasing the number of people who don't really understand, right, what it means to tick that box in relation to values and ethics code as well, then we're just creating more problems for ourselves. So I'm going to offer up a presentation on an other deck that Andrew Pollock and I put together. We're happy to come to ID Need and Iran again with these materials, but I also want to talk with PCO, because if you want to really unpack systemic barriers, you need to be looking at the kind of research that Andrew and I have been doing on a number of different fronts, because that really gets down into sort of that intersection data analysis and evidence-based approach. Okay, so I'm happy for Andrew and I to come and do that for you. I just gave a modified version of that presentation. And the other part to it was speaking on the complexities of Indigenous identity to Parks Canada senior leaders. Huge, huge, greatly appreciated. And the feedback was so kind from them. And it was helpful to them because they didn't have the tools in their toolbox. And I think that's something that everybody has to recognize, is that you have HR advisors, labor relations advisors, and others who may not necessarily be subject matter experts in different areas around EDI. And so we need to build a better community that actually is much more integrated and horizontal in nature, so that we can start these conversations about inclusion in a meaningful way. And the last thing that I will say is that for Indigenous populations, it really is important to get the messaging out into departments, particularly to HR, labor relations, values and ethics, and ombuds folks about implementing the UN DRIP. The bottom line is this: the courts have said that UN DRIP is part of domestic law, and we are not. The uptake within the federal system is very poor. So how can we talk about Indigenous inclusion when the system is not even doing what it's supposed to do at so many different levels? I think the same is true for other employment equity seeking groups or deserving groups in terms of the inclusion piece. The only thing is that UN DRIP doesn't relate to them. But we need to think about it in that context for them. What does inclusion mean as well? And then the last thing that somebody also raised was the values and ethics code. We need accountability frameworks around the values and ethics code at the departmental level, tied, of course, to this notion of inclusion and anti-racism and the clerk's call to action. I can tell you from my own work on self-ID and Indigenous identity, what I am hearing is that these frameworks do not exist. And so departments don't know how to deal with violations. So I've said everything that I need to say. We can have a longer conversation at another time. But thanks, you guys. Good work.
Merci, Caroline, and happy to host again this session with Ali for Aaron, if you want to come. Puis, je vais juste résumer rapidement ce que Caroline a mentionné là, par rapport à l'auto-identification. Il y a beaucoup d'accent, d'emphase qui est mis sur l'auto-identification, mais les gens ne comprennent pas nécessairement ce qui vient dans les dimensions d'auto-identification quand ça vient aux personnes autochtones. Donc, que les gens le veulent ou le veulent pas. Il y a parfois de l'usurpation d'identité, on va dire ça de même. Donc, avec, par exemple, toutes les conversations autour de l'auto-identification qui sera mise en œuvre par le secrétariat du Conseil du Trésor, ça serait important d'avoir des campagnes de sensibilisation à l'identité, tout autant que c'est important d'avoir des campagnes d'auto-identification. Donc, Caroline se porte volontaire avec Andrew de venir nous jaser éventuellement là, de tout ce beau contexte-là. Thank you, Caroline. Jackie.
Hello, thank you for this meeting. I'm so glad I was able to make this portion of it because I have to leave shortly. Just a few points. So, Natalie, I want to tell you that I hear you. I hear you and I see you. I work in diversity and inclusion at TBS. I do not work with OCRO, I do not work with OCRO. But I hear you. I've heard many of the members of our accessibility network say the same thing. The one thing that I will share, and I think Robert already said it, is, maybe not each group, but there are specific directives that address specific things. So there's the accessibility plan, we have the EE, we have, I wrote a few of them in there. The call to action was specifically raised after the murder of George Floyd and was race related, okay? So not seeing yourself in that, I understand. However, there are many who do not see themselves in the accessibility plan or a plan for 2S LGBTQAI+. So this is what I was saying, is that departments under the EEDI umbrella and plans should be rolling up their actions for each of these directives into those plans so that everybody can be seen there. So that's just my one thing on that, and my one perspective on why some are not seeing themselves seen in the CTA. Carolyn's comment touched on what I wanted to say most, which is that this siloed way that we work in government drives me to insanity, to the point that I actually created a group to discuss the call to action. I would like to challenge PCO to take the lead on this, because I don't really have the capacity to keep it up and do all the organization as frequently as I would like. I think there would be a lot of value, and it would be a help to yourselves to be able to meet with a group of people who are actually working on this stuff day after day, and to maybe, make them working groups, hash it out, figure it out or something. I do believe a cross-governmental approach is really important. It also helps us to have consistency from one department to the next. Not every department is going to apply the same thing necessarily, but there would probably be likely more consistency. Because one of the things I found with the meetings that I had is everybody's waiting for someone else to come up with a solution. But if we're working on the solutions together, then we can come up with them together. And I think that we could also accomplish something by getting sort of different pieces addressed, while we're doing that. Because as I said, I feel that people are sitting around waiting for someone else to point them to something. You have the contacts, PCO. You have, the information from the reports. You have the contacts that you're meeting with individually. And I would think that that is quite a laborious task. So I am going to just throw that out there to you and pitch it to you to perhaps take on that role of leading those meetings. Happy to help you if you want. But I think that coming from you, having you at the head of that would be quite helpful. I'm going to stop there as I have another meeting to go to. Thank you very much for this.
Merci, Jackie. Puis je vais juste résumer un peu. Jackie est invitée justement à la prochaine rencontre au mois d'octobre par rapport à ce groupe de travail-là qu'elle a créé, qui a différents intervenants qui s'assoient pour parler des meilleures pratiques en termes de mettre en œuvre l'appel à l'action du greffier. Donc, elle a demandé si les collègues du bureau du conseil privé pouvaient le prendre en charge. Puis, merci Germaine, je sais qu'il y a l'autre rencontre, merci. Donc, Rob est super gentil, va rester avec nous. So, Rob kindly agreed to stay with us, but we'll go to Ali. Ali, go ahead. And if people can mute themselves if they're not talking, please, just because I get some background noise. Merci.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Rob. And thanks to Jermaine for the presentation. Appreciate you coming by. Just want to raise a couple of quick points here. Comparing the centralized way that RTO has been handled in the public service compared to the call to action. I think it highlights that when we want accountability, we know exactly how to get it. We have centralized approaches. We hold senior leaders to account. There's reporting mechanisms and requirements, and through that, our objectives are met. Now, when it comes to the call to action, and there's quite a big difference in terms of the call to action and RTO, in that call to action is also fundamental to multiple laws, regulations, and directives. But it seems to be more of a piece around, suggestions and, here's some best practices, see what you could do without any real kind of accountability built in. Just wanted to make that comment. One other one is, as folks have kind of mentioned in the comments already, I think a lot of the employee networks and the people that are doing this work at the ground level would be surprised with what was officially reported by their departments, because there likely wasn't as much meaningful consultation and inclusion of these groups as we would hope for. And lastly, to the point regarding disability inclusion, I think that folks that have been around doing this work in terms of anti-racism have always understood that, when we're talking about anti-racism and we're talking about intersectionality, it is about dismantling all interlocking forms of oppression, and that always includes ableism, because it's primarily because of Black, Indigenous, and racialized communities that are disabled are facing by far the most barriers, and that goes with all of the equity groups. So I just want to make those 3 points. And again, Rob, thank you so much for attending.
Thank you, Ali. Bill.
At some point, I want to keep this to the calls for action. So I'm just going to stick to what's fundamental to the calls to action. And I did share something in the post, and that is we have to have everything we do has to have an equity lens. And if we go back to what was shared with me during the pandemic and after the pandemic, so many people, so many of the Black employees that have reached out to me have stated how, while they're remote, they had less barriers. They had a more accepting relationship with their departments. Then we moved to return to office. And all of a sudden we're saying everybody must go back, but we have not, even in what you shared, stated that the departments have not yet fixed the problems of racism within their departments, and we're forcing people back in. And many people are reaching out to me now stating that they don't feel comfortable. They feel that they're going back to a place of harassment and lack of opportunities. And I'm hearing from a lot of departments saying, well, yes, we need to fix it. But we need to have that equity lens and realize if we say we need to fix it, we're acknowledging it's broken now, and we are sending people into unsafe environments. And that is what's broken with a lot of this, is that we're okay with sending people in where they're not safe, and they will be harmed instead of fixing it first and then saying come back. So I just wanted to use RTO in that perspective, that this is another fail point, that we really didn't add that diversity and inclusion lens when we made these changes.
Merci. Puis là, Rob, il est tout doux. I will speak to what Bill said. And then I'll add on a little bit, maybe. Donc, Bill a mentionné que de par les rapports ou ce que les données démontrent de ce qui a été soumis au BCP, il y a quand même toujours des enjeux en termes de racisme et ce n'est pas un environnement qui est nécessairement sécuritaire d'un point de vue psychologique ou physique pour certains employés. Donc, dans le contexte de retour au travail, on ramène les employés à un endroit qui ne semble pas sécuritaire en se basant sur les données. Donc, est-ce qu'il n'y aurait pas eu matière à faire le travail requis pour avoir les données qui représentent un milieu sécuritaire pour ensuite ramener les employés? Donc, c'est ça que Bill a dit. And maybe that's where the 13th, I can never pronounce that word in English, le 13e facteur psychosocial que Dr. Nicholas pousse par rapport aux conditions de racisme qui ont des impacts psychologiques devient peut-être pertinent. And that, Rob, we could discuss with you and maybe invite Dr. Nicholas to that conversation where I believe CSPS already has that in terms of the 13th psychological safety hazard in terms of having the racist component assessed. Puis, mon cher Ensa, vas-y fort. Hence? Je t'entends pas.
Sorry, was that me? No.
Ensa, ça marche?
Ça marche?
Oui, ça fonctionne. Vas-y.
OK. Donc, pour l'appel à donc, merci d'abord pour cette belle présentation. Donc, pour l'appel à l'action, on parle de barrières, de diagnostiquer, de voir qu'est-ce qui ne va pas. Et puis, je pense qu'on connaît c'est quoi les barrières. Maintenant, c'est vraiment l'action. Parce que le temps passe et puis on ne voit pas de résultats. Et puis, genre, un exemple, il y avait une initiative du Conseil du Trésor dont le but était de recruter 5000 personnes vivant avec un handicap dont l'objectif était pour 2025. Où est-ce qu'on en est? Est-ce qu'il y a un suivi pour qu'on puisse voir si on est en train d'atteindre ces objectifs-là? L'aspect intersectionnalité aussi. Parce qu'il ne faudrait pas aussi qu'on parle d'élection. Donc, il se pourrait qu'il y ait un gouvernement conservateur qui vienne au pouvoir et la priorité du gouvernement actuel peut ne pas être la priorité du gouvernement qui viendra. Donc, sur ce fait-là, je ne voudrais pas qu'on fasse un pas en avant et puis 2 pas en arrière. Donc, c'est pourquoi il faut aller vite et puis justement qu'on ait des résultats. Donc, c'est ça. Ce que je trouve, c'est que il y a beaucoup de théories, mais il y a peu d'actions, peu de résultats jusqu'à date. Ça a pris beaucoup de temps pour que les femmes ici, l'équité entre hommes et femmes dans la fonction publique, au moins qu'ils puissent, qu'ils réduisent le gap. Ça a pris beaucoup de temps et puis j'aimerais pas qu'on prenne le même temps pour réduire le gap pour les personnes handicapées, pour les minorités visibles et pour les autres groupes d'équité. C'était mon commentaire et je vous remercie.
Merci, Insa. Donc, just to summarize, Insa mentioned that there's the results don't show the type of intent behind the various calls, being the call to action, the 5,000 hires for persons with disabilities. And there's also a need for intersectionality to be assessed. With a potential looming election, it might mean that we get reduced resources or impact in the future. So we don't want to get back to where we were in the past. We want to move forward. And some does want to see it be as a long delay to fill the gaps for all equity groups as it was an issue for women to get an equitable representation in the workplace because it took a whole lot of time. So basically, those were the points that he raised. C'était correct, Yansa? C'est ça?
Oui, c'est parfait. Merci beaucoup, Marilyn.
Samir?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Robert and the panel. And I agree with a lot of the individuals ahead of me who spoke. My name is Samir Musa. I'm the interim chair of the Visible Minority at Public Service Procurement Canada, and also the co-chair of the Persons Disability. You know, we've been at this for at least myself for 3 years, working on the action plan, trying to get data, statistics. We've accomplished all that, and the question is, our members from the visible minority, including Black, are still facing racism, especially and including on top of it, if they are a person's disability, as the previous the Deputy Minister Dan Quan Watson, when he was invited to our department with Bill Matthews at the time, it was said that visible minorities by itself is a quite a task to overcome. Combine it with persons with disability, it's a double whammy. Our members are still facing basically difficulty, especially when they're identifying themselves with accommodation. The system, as previous speakers have said, there's nothing in place to actually have some sort of plan on how to provide equity for individuals with accommodation, especially when it comes to new positions. They're being dismissed because they have accommodation, because the management does not know how to identify or treat a person who does not require accommodation doing his job well to a person who is requiring accommodation and telling them that there is equity there. How do you provide that equity? Our members, especially from the Black community, I was dealing with when he did declare his accommodation, he was almost pushed out of his position as being a burden on the department. It wasn't for intervention of the deputy ministers who actually changed that course. We are lucky to have deputy ministers who are committed, but again, how do you train your managers, HR, to be able to deal with this? There's no plan, there's no action to actually how to do the actual intent. The idea is well taken. They respect people with disability, but I don't think there's a process in place to actually deal with these things. And I think the action plan has been done. We're working on it for the last 3 years, but there's no actual process how to deal with these issues. So I just wanted just to mention that, and I always enjoy these panelists. Thank you so much for making them happen. We learn a lot from them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Samir. And maybe to add on, and these were part of my questions, but Ty, I will get back to you in a second. I think from what we were looking at in the PowerPoint, and then I'll do it in French, don't worry, folks. There seems to be a lack of, yes, processes, but then actual measures that go with the processes. As you mentioned, Rob, there's a qualitative statement, and then there's no disaggregation of what this means in terms of actual steps, and how do you assess those steps, and how do you know if those steps are successful? So I would like to invite us collectively perhaps to work with PCO to how can we make these some traceable, accountable steps, so then we can move together, so we're not having the same conversation in 10 years, basically. But that's me, who's been working in this for 15 years at this point. Ty, go ahead. Oh, en français, juste 30 secondes. Samir a juste dit qu'il y a beaucoup d'actions énumérées, mais il y a pas les processus derrière. Donc, ça devient très difficile de quantifier le tout puis d'enrayer les enjeux. Par exemple, les personnes en situation de handicap. Une fois que les personnes mentionnent qu'ils ont un besoin, ben, ça devient difficile, fait qu'on les met de côté. Puis on voit ça souvent. Puis quand on ajoute l'intersectionnalité ou les identités intersectionnaires, ben là, c'est clair que les enjeux sont multidimensionnels. Merci, désolée.
I just want to give Elle Robinson a chance to speak first since they were ahead of me in line. So
Go ahead. So sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. First of all, I want to apologize to myself because I'm sorry I missed, and to you because I missed the presentation and I had to jump in late. And I'm really, really grateful for this and discussions like this. So thank you to everybody who pulled this together. And I have been really enriched by the discussion, and so many of the comments made before mine have kind of set me down different paths. So I have just a few points if I could make. I hear a lot about addressing systemic barriers, creating systems change, doing intersectionality, and I wonder if we know what that actually means, to see something through an intersectional lens. I have a few things about this. Is first of all, respectfully, sometimes this is overwhelming, and I hear like, okay, we need processes for how to, we don't know how to. We absolutely do. There's so much expertise in this group alone. I bet you a little bit of money, not a lot, because, but I bet you within this group, if we started to ask, there would be a show of hands. Myself, I've been like everybody else probably in this fight for years. An example, myself in my own work, I have been the same problem. We have these big discussions and we have apparently no mechanism to grab the ideas and the challenges, the issues, the harm, and the way forward that surfaces in these discussions, and grab them out of the air and turn them into something that is tangible. I'm not saying that this is a simple issue that we can go boom, 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 here you go, here's your solutions. At least to grab what has surfaced and put it into something so that in 4 years, in 10 years, we're not repeating, we're moving forward. I am testing a framework at my work. I'll put my name in the chat. So I guess what I'm advocating for is what others have said, which is an interdepartmental working group, because we need to get to work. Because there has to be a way to move this forward, because as I'm talking, people are being hurt. So I am more than, I have no PhD. I have a lot of lived experience. I have a lot of lived expertise. I've been, like many of us, in the weeds of this, in the grind for years. And I think we're not doing anybody any favors that these, not just our voices, but the work that we're doing isn't being elevated, because in the end, in any kind of wicked problem, which this is, the best solutions and the best richest information, the richest data, the best way forward is going to come from the people closest to the issues, living and working in it. So I wish to advocate for ourselves to be elevated. And the other thing is, when we talk about intersectionality, I've been raising this point again and again, and I'll raise it to anybody who will listen. Now we say intersectionality. In the federal government, we started saying GBA+. But it's more fashionable now to say intersectionality. But I want to flag that from my perspective, and what I've been seeing is how we implement, how we do intersectionality, or how we do intersectional analysis is, from my perspective, I can only speak for myself, is I think that it's absolutely soaked in colonial white supremacist bureaucracy. And for anyone who's ever had an immigrant experience, as I have with paperwork and white people asking you what's wrong and then trying to fix it for you, it's that again, 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 and again, and again. It's absolutely replicating colonial agents going to the outpost to say, okay, this is what we need. So I really want to flag that. I want to encourage people to read Patricia Hill Collins and others. And I want to advocate for a collective analysis. And I actually want to try and move past the word analysis, which is kind of reductionist. And we need to start thinking about a system of systems that's open to the environment. Like this is a complex web and it's all interconnected. But I'm speaking a lot of like big words and systems language because frankly, I've been reading a lot of it. But we must never forget that who owns the platform owns the power. And we have to, this isn't about us, it's about all of us, the collective, and the people who keep getting hurt again and again, and all they want to do is have the same benefits as everybody else and get to work. So sorry, I'm sure I have like 10 other things to say, but I'll stop. Thank you very much.
Non, merci beaucoup, c'est super informatif. Donc, comme elle a mentionné, c'est nouveau, là, la terminologie intersectionnelle au gouvernement du Canada, mais précédemment, on utilisait l'ACS+. Donc, ça dépend de la terminologie qu'on souhaite utiliser. On devrait faire une étude des systèmes parce que vraiment, c'est complexe tout ce qu'on essaie d'évaluer. Puis, elle recommande de lire Patricia Hill Collins. Je vais juste rajouter peut-être un point là, parce qu'on a mentionné le besoin de continuité par rapport à l'information qui est fournie, les voix qui sont captées, puis qu'est-ce qu'on fait avec. De par mes observations, souvent, initialement, on dit qu'on va faire quelque chose, mais ensuite, on ne le fait pas. Exemple, case in point, il y a quelques années, dans le cadre de responsabilisation en gestion, il y avait une question sur les mesures d'adaptation. Combien est-ce que vous investissez? Et quels sont, par exemple, les délais? Je pense que c'est en 2019. On n'a plus jamais rien vu après. So, somebody needs to mute themselves. Okay. So just to this point, I think there's the lack of continuously assessing the same item. Like the MAF 2019 had this component about DTA. How much do you invest? What's the timeline? And then nothing. So even though at some point it was identified that there might be issues, no follow-ups were made to see did it improve or did it not improve. Then we'll go to Tai and Caitlin and Leon, and then we'll keep a few minutes to talk about International Sign Language Day, please. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think I can keep it, I can keep this kind of pointed because the comments before were all really well and kind of underlined what I wanted to say with regard to the barriers that exist. If we know that there are barriers that need to be dismantled, we understand that systemic oppression exists. I think the more that we try to create policy within a system of oppression, that policy can only ever privilege those closest to the center. And so I think that we need to have an understanding of that it's the same folks that get told to wait your turn, and that turn never comes, which is why we're here 30 years later. And we need to understand the work we're doing is based in legislation that was inspired by the death of Black people, by the suffering of marginalized people as a whole. And so I think that needs to be recognized, and there's no waiting the turn because we've seen public servants come and go in the government of Canada without seeing any demonstrable change. That said, I'm wondering, with regard to this particular process and the reporting that PCO is leading today, and thank you for the presentation. It was really good to see it. I'm curious because some of the data that's presented there does rely on self-reporting on behalf of departments. So when we're looking to create that accountability, one of the things we've done, sorry, I should have introduced myself. Ty Lewis, I'm the Associate Director for the Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility Secretariat within the Ombuds Office at Indigenous Services Canada. One of the things that we've done is created a consultation guide. And so anybody who wants to be able to consult with the networks need to actually get sign off for us to consider it a proper consultation process. And that requires things like feedback, validation of what was heard, and then kind of demonstrating incorporation of what was heard within any kind of reporting that goes forward. So I'm wondering from PCO standpoint, because we've heard from a number of different areas that, there wasn't necessarily a consultation happening at the network level, if when this gets tasked out in the future, it goes with a routing slip or some type of consultation guide that essentially, if that is not signed off or approved, that any report would not perhaps be accepted by PCO, for example, or it would be accepted with the understanding that the consultation did not happen appropriately internally. I'm just wondering if that is something that you're considering for the next phase.
Yeah, so I can jump in and answer. So when the clerk sent out sort of the asking of people to deputies, we tried to make it very clear that the expectation was.
You need to speak up.
Sorry, that the expectation, is this better? Was to engage with your employees. And when we met with some individual organizations, kind of the approach we used was, we're publishing all these results online. They're going to be public. Your employees can read them. The public can read them. And so you probably don't want to surprise your employees with what's in your self-assessments. That said, I totally hear you that it sounds like a number of organizations did not do that. Part of our challenge, frankly, is we deal with so many different organizations on this exercise, from 20 to 20,000. And so there are a few organizations that don't have formal employee networks when they're just so tiny. So it does provide us with a bit of a challenge in terms of being overly prescriptive and saying, exactly, this is how you need to do the consultations within your own organizations. But I'll finish off with saying we're very open to figuring out different ways to do this going forward, different approaches, right? Whether that is a sign-off sheet or something else to make it more effective, because we want to make sure that these self-assessments are not causing further harm in the system when they're completed and not sort of fully engaged as they should be.
Or at all. But to Taro's point, what she mentioned, ou ce qu'elle a mentionné, c'est vraiment qu'il y a certaines organisations qui n'ont pas consulté les réseaux internes et à service aux Autochtones. Canada, il y a par contre l'équipe du groupe de travail a créé un guide de consultation qui sert de validation, comme quoi les réseaux ont vraiment été consultés. Donc, serait-il possible à l'avenir, par exemple, que le BCP ait ce genre de document, mais Rob a mentionné qu'ils sont quand même limités dans ce qu'ils peuvent faire comme obligatoire dans le processus. Cependant, on sait qu'il y a plusieurs personnes qui ont trouvé que c'était surprenant ce qu'ils avaient vu dans les réponses ministérielles. Donc, il faudrait trouver une solution peut-être conjointe. Pendant qu'on parlait, j'ai pensé à EECCCs à travers TBS. Peut-être que ça serait que PCO pourrait aller présenter, well, we're doing this. Shortly, so all the network chairs are advised at the same specific time. Donc, peut-être que le BCP pourrait aller présenter au EECCC à travers le secrétariat du Conseil du Trésor pour dire que ce type d'exercice s'en vient. Au moins, les gens l'auraient sur leur radar. Mais on pourrait trouver peut-être une solution. Je veux dire, il y a plein de gens de réseaux ici. Peut-être qu'on peut penser ensemble à une sorte de mécanisme qui serait favorable. And then Caitlin.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I want to echo 2 points that Ty made. First of all, that PCH has an accountability to ensure that consultation and representation and data collection are accurate to the best of its ability, particularly when you're reporting on an action plan that you've developed and are recommending that all government departments implement or use as a model for implementation. That includes ensuring that self-assessments are appropriately administered, and the data from those self-assessments also are appropriately cataloged and interpreted. Secondly, I just want to flag too, while I do really appreciate that there is an action plan in place, it seems to me that still the government of Canada is approaching this as if it were like the first time we were addressing anti-racism or ableism or just general sexism in the government of Canada. It's been, as Ty mentioned as well, a minimum of 30 years. That we've had various action plans and activities that the government of Canada has attempted to implement. And I think that that self-awareness and that consideration needs to be taken into account in this action plan, particularly not necessarily looking back on the successes that we've achieved, but particularly looking at the fact that we haven't gotten as far as we ought to have in the last 30 or 40 years, and addressing that too in our meaningful implementation. So thirdly, I want to speak to equity and meaningful implementation, particularly to slide 6 as an example, talking about the percentage of organizations that have set recruitment and promotion goals. I just want to highlight that your recruitment goals that have been collected in that data far outpace the promotion goals that have been set by departments that have reported on these numbers. And I think we should take into consideration that we know for sure, it's been statistically proven that Black, Brown, and Indigenous employees, including those with disabilities, are hired in entry-level positions, often in contract or casual or term positions. And I think that consideration needs to be taken into account when we're looking at this in terms of recruitment goals, setting recruitment goals, and maybe considering the prioritization that we have placed on recruitment as being out of balance with where we should be putting our focus, and that is in retention and in promotion internally. So asking ourselves again, if our retention goals for BIPOC and people with disabilities within that spectra are low, why is this? And could it be because our efforts are being put more towards recruitment to increase numbers, which, as you know, is a temporary fix and not necessarily sustainable in the long term? Particular to this, I want to also flag that if we're putting emphasis on increasing the number of equity-deserving groups within organizations that are structurally racist, we're also going to see an increased number of human resourcing, litigation, labor relations challenges, because, again, back to Bill's point, we're inviting people into spaces that are racist and colonialist and not healthy mentally or physically or emotionally for people to be participating in. Finally, by putting the focus on increasing the number of equity-deserving groups within our organizations, we're also inadvertently, maybe not explicitly, putting the burden on those groups to change the culture and to instruct those institutions on how to resolve the issues of sexism or racism or ableism, right? Because we're basically counting on the numbers to reduce or remove the problem. And I think that's also misguided because everybody is capable of racism. Everybody is capable of sexism, and bringing people with different skin tone into a place, or people with different physical abilities into a place, is not automatically going to resolve the problem of racism and sexism and ableism. So I think I just wanted to use those as highlights. There are many more considerations that we can look to when we're looking at this this deck, and I would be happy to have another conversation either on this side or with other people in this room that kind of want to explore deeper, particularly to what we're talking about when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion within a colonialist, racist institution. Thanks.
Thank you, Caitlin. Donc, Caitlin a mentionné qu'il y a vraiment un besoin, puis là, je vais essayer de me garder très succincte, qu'il y a vraiment un besoin de connaissance ou de prendre conscience de ses propres actions quand on fait une évaluation de ce type-là, parce que c'est clair qu'il y a un disconnect peut-être entre le produit et les actions, là. Donc, ça serait le moment de regarder à la concrétisation d'une façon comme importante, le meaningful implementation, puis qu'il y a des potentielles hypothèses de pourquoi il y a certains chiffres, par exemple le recrutement qui est plus haut que les promotions ou la rétention. Donc, est-ce qu'on essaie de mousser les chiffres pour bien paraître plutôt que d'avoir une réelle volonté de changement? Est-ce qu'on va chercher des gens d'une façon temporaire juste pour avoir des bons chiffres? Donc, et en rentrant ces gens-là de façon temporaire dans des institutions qui ne sont pas nécessairement les plus inclusives, on va avoir des problèmes côté législatif, plein d'autres dépenses qui pourraient rentrer en ligne de compte, qui viennent avec un environnement qui n'est pas favorable pour les employés, donc par exemple des congés de maladie et tout ça, plus de dépenses, plus de problèmes, si je peux dire, tant qu'on n'a pas adressé la structure ou les enjeux structuraux qui existent. Donc, je vais juste mentionner pour les interprètes, so for the sign language interpreters, I know your time is up. If you need to go, we'll keep for Leon and Robert, and then we'll leave it at that for today, but happy to have more conversations. Kat, are you okay with the transcription, though? Catherine? 10 minutes, je vais te trouver. I shall find you. Kat? Où es-tu, Kat?
Yes, no problem. Yes.
Okay. In terms of interpretation, are you okay for the next 5-10 minutes? Or Kat, you're okay with the captioning? Good with the captioning?
And it's up to the interpreters whether or not they can stay, or whether they have to leave. But if they have to leave, I understand. Okay.
Dear Leon, go ahead.
Merci. Sorry. Okay, there I am. So I'll try to be brief. It's a question that I asked in the chat, or 2 questions. So I work in ED. I actually had to do some of the heavy lifting in the response. So it was, like, good to see this coming, and at the same time, understanding the shortcomings of self-assessment, timing, including, because I would say, even from my perspective, the time for consultation was not enough, and a lot of other things, right? Like I think, one of my suggestions was, if you're thinking of doing, reaching out to networks and, doing consultation that is not necessarily just asking the department, but really talking with those who are impacted by the cultural action, so that, to hear that, because I think, like, we're measuring actions versus measuring impacts, or asking about the impacts. And I think that's, even though some of the questions were leaning towards that, I think even the capacity to really say these are the impacts was very limited. So that would be a nice follow-up or a nice addition, and a way to also contrast what we have, because how it was reported, even, internally within the departments, you could have probably very different approaches even within a single department. And and maybe different meanings even as to what inclusion or action is, as easy as that. So sometimes like having even I know there were instructions for plain language, but having certain definitions so that in order for everybody to have a common language would be also, I think, a good addition. And I think more than a self-assessment, it'd be interesting to see a framework, or like a reporting framework, or with certain elements, right? Like, I mean, I think you're asking these questions, you're looking at these goals, you're building this knowledge. So looking also, a follow-up of this could be like, hey, last year or last time you had this percentage. What's your percentage now? Like, where are you now with these? So having that accountability also embedded. I know you're building these, but that would be one of the aspects and suggestions that I would say. But the other one is really what happens, and have you identified which points intersect with legislation, with compliance? For example, having hiring goals is not an option. It's something that you have to have for underrepresented groups. So even the answer no, to me, is something to be flagged. But now that you have this knowledge, what do you do? Or does it again depend on someone putting a complaint with the Human Rights Commission, or internally? So there, I think, what is really PCO's responsibility when now you have this information, you can detect this. What is PCO doing with that, and especially if you're working with OCRO, because that's also very, very close to TBS responsibilities, ensuring compliance with the policy on people management in particularly, and a lot of instruments that derive from it, but not only that. So I'm wondering if there is any plan, if this is being looked at, even with the questions that is being asked, or again, this is just something where it becomes a lot of self-advocacy in terms of saying, hey, we're not compliant, the laws are being broken, but then again, like nothing, that is not being followed, even though we have the information for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Leon.
Yeah, I can do a quick jump in on that. So one, you're absolutely right. A lot of the questions and elements that the call to action for direction was based on are actually also captured in certain legislation like the EE Act. I'll be honest with you in terms of the exact specifics of exactly where we are going to next. We've been spending our summer doing a pretty heavy lift, frankly, just reading through the reports, trying to distill the data right to the summary reports. And so we're actually turning our attention now to try and figure out where it is we want to go to next on sort of this amount of information that's come into us. Obviously we're sharing it out with you. The reactions that I'm getting back, that Germain's getting back, are helpful, and getting frank and authentic reactions back is helpful. And so it's, we have to figure out, I think where to go next on that, on the systemic barriers piece. I think, a long sort of road ahead on us in terms of trying to pinpoint, right, some of those, and some of the sort of the legislative obligations too is a good question you raise, and something that I think we'll go back as a team here and discuss that further. So thank you for raising that piece.
Merci. Je vais juste résumer super rapidement. Donc, Léon a mentionné, par exemple, que c'est beaucoup de la mesure d'action et non de la mesure de l'impact des actions, ce qui était vraiment l'intention derrière l'exercice. Puis qu'il y a des gens, ou pas des gens, mais des organisations qui ont rapporté ne pas rencontrer certains des éléments qui avaient été identifiés dans le questionnaire. Et certains de ces éléments-là étaient, dans le fond, des obligations législatives. Si on parle, par exemple, d'établir des objectifs quantitatifs mais c'est sous la loi d'équité en matière d'emploi. C'est pas une chose que tu fais pour le plaisir. C'est vraiment une obligation légale. Donc, ces organisations-là, qu'est-ce qui arrive avec ces organisations-là qui ne suivent pas leurs obligations légales? Donc, Rob a mentionné qu'il n'a pas eu le temps là-bas encore de se pencher sur cette question-là parce qu'il était tellement occupé à colliger toute l'information reçue au courant de l'été, mais c'est quelque chose que l'équipe va étudier au courant des prochaines étapes. Merci. Robert.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert, for the presentation. I'm aware of the time. Just very quickly, when the call for action came out, I was somewhat optimistic, having been around for over 30 years. And we've been through something very similar with embracing change, almost 25 years ago. We're basically doing the same thing all over again, and we're actually encountering the same issues with the results. And I think a lot of it has to do with what your report touched on, and that is the self-assessment. The self-assessments actually looks a lot at the proposed actions and some more of the high-level reporting that departments can point to from a percentage basis. And it doesn't address the more kind of nuanced stuff with staffing as far as promotion, level, other type of staffing exercises like extended acting assignments that kind of circumvent that. And as long as we continue to have self-reporting by departments that allow them to put things in favorable lights, we're going to have the same results that we had after embracing change. And in another 25 years, we're going to have another episode doing this. I think really what a PCO wants to see the results is that they actually have to have a template that actually says, this is what we want to look at. And it's a comparative analysis of the number of promotions, the number of acting assignments, the number of permanent assignments, broken down by groups to compare, so that then you can actually publicly show that in the last fiscal year, Department X had X number of processes, and of those processes, it affected positively so many people from each of these equity groups. But as long as we have self-assessments at high levels that deal with percentages and a comparison to the workforce availability, we're not going to move forward with moving the mark. And I know that you had indicated that the self-assessments and public reporting was a way of actually holding departments accountable. Departments can still escape that accountability by hiding under the larger percentage numbers. So my recommendation would be that if PCO wants to see actual results from this call to action and not end up in the same situation we were with embracing change and having to repeat this in another 25 years, is we actually have to have, as Leon had suggested, a template that actually holds that accountability that's measurable, and that measured accountability from a comparative analysis is public. Just my comments. I think that would actually help us move this forward. Thank you.
Je trouve que c'est une super belle idée. Robert a mentionné justement qu'il y a tous ces rapports-là qui existent depuis multiples années. Là. Il y avait des choses qui s'appelaient Embrassons le changement ou Acceptons le changement il y a une trentaine d'années, puis finalement, on est à la même place. Donc, c'est vraiment important d'avoir quelque chose en place qui permet de mesurer le changement et d'avoir l'imputabilité nécessaire pour pousser le vrai changement. Donc, un peu comme Leon a mentionné, là, ça serait intéressant de voir quelque chose se concrétiser. Donc, and maybe I'm thinking out loud here, Rob, but perhaps it's something akin to what they're doing in terms of finances, because basically or essentially that's what it's going to come down to. There's a whole lot of money that was invested in this work through the people, through the resources that were allocated. Meanwhile, are we hitting or missing the mark? So maybe using that type of transparency, accountability measures, but basing it on equity work. It's still trying to assess where the public funds are going. Donc, ça, c'est peut-être juste ma petite pensée, là, thinking of a potential new government that likes to count at money. Peut-être utiliser cet aspect-là là, de qu'est-ce qu'on a fait avec les ressources, l'argent, toute l'action et l'activité autour de l'équité, diversité, inclusion, accessibilité. Est-ce que c'est possible de juste le comptabiliser pour essayer de démontrer l'importance et le mouvement qui a été fait? Donc, c'est ça, un peu comme Shamir a mis dans le lavardage, c'est d'essayer d'appuyer ce qu'on a fait et non de donner du jus ou de la viande à l'adversaire ou aux parties adverses qui vont dire que ça ne servait à rien. Donc, merci pour tout. Thank you, Rob, for being such a good sport and staying with us longer than expected and just receiving all of these comments and thoughts with grace. And we appreciate you and you coming and chatting with us and being so open and looking forward to next steps and having you again with us. And I'll just say a quick few words. Donc, le 23 septembre, next Monday, basically, there's going to be International Sign Language Day that PSPC is hosting. Please log in, log on, and see it, the event in the afternoon. Donc, lundi prochain, en après-midi, il va y avoir la Journée internationale des langues des signes. C'est un super bel événement. Il va y avoir des panélistes, puis on espère vous voir là-bas. Thank you, Ali, for everything. Thank you, everyone, for being present and all of your thoughts and comments. I think they were very insightful, and I think we all were very good and came together. Merci aux interprètes aussi. Thank you to the interpreters. I appreciate you and extending a little bit beyond the time we had scheduled. Donc, merci beaucoup à tout le monde. Thank you, everyone, and looking forward to seeing you again next week, basically. So, à la semaine prochaine. Prenez soin de vous et des autres. Take care of yourselves and each other. Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Merci.
Merci.